I'm Annie Altamirano. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Empowering Teachers Worldwide. Today, I would like to talk about differentiated questioning. One very important aspect of differentiation by process and of differentiation in general is differentiated questioning. The types of questions that we ask and the context in which we ask them is extremely important. It's said that we ask about 100 questions during a class, so that's 100 opportunities to stimulate learning, stimulate thinking, drive students forward. However, studies have found that at least 60% of the questions that we ask in class are recall questions. Between 12 and 30% are class management questions, and only about 4% are higher order questions, which are the questions that will help develop deeper learning, and we also tend to ask them to the more able students. Higher order questions require answers that go beyond the simple recall of information, and as such, both the language and the thinking behind them is more complex. They take learners into more abstract language functions, such as, for example, giving and justifying opinions, speculating, making hypotheses. So, for example, let's take this. If we ask, what colors make up a rainbow? That is an observational question. But if we ask, why are rainbows important? That is a higher order question. So among the many functions of higher order questions, they can be used to get students to interpret things, suggest solutions, explain why something is important, give opinions, make comparisons. So learners need to have the opportunity to practice using language for these functions. So, in order to ask higher order questions easily, you can base them on Bloom's taxonomy. The taxonomy has 6 levels, as you can see here in the pyramid. Each level is more challenging than the last, so it describes how mastery develops as learners become more competent and more confident. Knowledge, as you can see here, is the simplest level at the bottom, and evaluation is the most challenging at the top. So, what I suggest is use Bloom's taxonomy to do the work for you. You can find lots of examples online of different words, different verbs that are appropriate for the different levels of the taxonomy, and you can use those verbs as the basis for your questions. Another good idea is to use think, pair, share. This is one easy way to develop a question in the classroom, because this strategy encourages learners to think about a question individually for a minute or two. Then they form a discussion pair where they share their ideas and ask each other questions, and then they form a larger group, or you have a whole class forum and discuss and question ideas. Also, you can use turn and talk. So, when they are prompted, students turn to a shoulder buddy or a neighbor, and in a set amount of time, they share their ideas about the prompt or the question that you have posed, or other students have posed. Depending on the goal of the lesson and the nature of the turn and talk, they may share key ideas from their discussions with the class. Also, the 5W questions. This is very, very simple and very effective. You have the who, what, where, why, when, and you can add how to the list too. And these can be useful in a guided discussion when you're giving them reflection prompts, the formation of essential questions, and more. For example, What's the point? What's the big idea? What's the purpose? Mhm. These all stimulate critical thinking. Where did you find that? How does the writer, for example, if they are doing a reading comprehension, how does the writer solve the problem? Mhm. Um, eh, what are the underlying assumptions of the author's message? How can I improve questions that I have asked or my classmates have asked? So there are lots of possibilities by using WH words and how. Then you have another very simple technique and also very effective, the show me, tell me, convince me. We say to some learners, for example, can you show me what the answer is? Or can you show me what you think the right way to do this is? When they say, um, uh, also when they give you the answer, um, you tell them, can you tell me why that's the right way to answer or why that's the right way to do this? So this is a bit more challenging. And then you have the third one. Convince me. Can you convince me that that's the right way to answer or the right way to do things? So we are asking different questions to different learners at different times. And as a result, we can personalize the questions. We go to one group, for example, and they are struggling, so we focus just on the show me. Then we go to another group and they are finding the task easy. So you jump straight to the convince me. Also, another very useful way of asking questions is to use Socratic questioning. Socrates was one of the greatest educators of all time, and he taught his students by asking questions. So he drew the answers from the students. So we can outline the 6 types of Socratic questions that can develop critical thinking in learners. And we have this here you have the 6 types, and the overall purpose of Socratic questioning is to challenge accuracy and completeness of thinking in a way that acts to move people towards their ultimate goal. So, for example, you have clarification questions that get students to think more about what exactly they are asking or thinking about. They have to prove the arguments behind the concepts behind their argument. You can use basic tell me more questions and then get them to go deeper. For example, a question for clarification could be, why are you saying that? What exactly does it mean? How does this relate to what we have been talking about? Then you have probing questions that make them think about presuppositions or unquestioned beliefs on which they are founding an argument. And so by asking these questions, you are shaking the bedrock and get them thinking. So you say, for example, you seem to be assuming that, or do you agree or disagree with? Also, questions that probe reasons, rationale, and evidence. Uh, when they give a rationale for their arguments, you can dig into that reasoning rather than assuming it is a given. So, for example, why is that happening? How do you know this? Show me. Also, questions that question viewpoints and perspectives. So, most arguments are given from a particular position. So, attack the position. I mean, attack politely, attack the position. Show that there are other equally valid viewpoints. For example, another way of looking at this issue is blah, blah, blah. Does this seem reasonable to you? Or what alternative ways of looking at this problem are there? What is the difference between this argument and that argument? Also, questions that probe implications and consequences. Um, so, for example, the argument that the student gives may have logical implications that can be forecast. So, do these make sense? Are they desirable? What would happen then? What are the consequences of the assumption? And finally, questions about questions or meta questions. You can also get reflexive about the whole thing, turning the question in on itself. So, for example, what was the point of asking that question? Why do you think I asked that question? Now, to ensure that we ask higher order questions, we need to think carefully about them and plan them in advance to stimulate discussion. And we should develop key questions that will help our students deepen their understanding. So how do we do that? So we plan significant questions before the class. We use wait time, thinking time, and response time. Sometimes we don't give students time to think. We expect an automatic answer. And just to think of ourselves, what questions can you ask automatically without thinking? Probably what's your name and just that, or what's your children's name. But we need to give students thinking time. Also, no hands up technique. And it means exactly that. You ask a question, you allow thinking time, and only then you identify the student who is to respond first. This is differentiation in practice because we are exposing all the students to the question, but we are targeting the response. Also, it's important to follow up on the students' responses so that we are challenging their thinking, yes, and encouraging them to developing their arguments more. Ask probing questions that require them to go beyond the first response and form subsequent questions based on their response. Also, periodically summarize key points in writing on the board so that if there is a whole class discussion, the key points are not lost and the discussion doesn't drift along paths that you didn't want them to drift along. Draw as many people as possible into the discussion and let the students discover knowledge on their own. Don't spoon feed them. Sometimes we tend to help them too much. And finally, plan the questions. Here are 3 ways in which you can plan your questions. While you are planning your lesson, for example, what I do is I write questions on sticky notes and I put them in the book, or I stick them onto my lesson plan. So, for example, think about this. Are there any students you particularly want to ask questions to? If so, which questions are you going to ask them? You may have identified a very confident student and you want to develop some challenging questions to ask them. Or there may be some students who seem to be having difficulties and you need to plan for supportive questioning. Also, what sort of information would you like to elicit from them? And having thought of that, decide what questions you are going to ask. Are there any particular types of questions that you would like to ask? Which questions are they? Of course, this is not written on stone, so you may ask questions and change depending on what happens. Now, how do you handle student responses to questions? Now, an important aspect of student interaction is the manner in which you handle the questions, the responses, sorry. So, when you ask a question, there are 3 possibilities. Students respond, students ask a question in turn, or silence. And nobody replies. So, what can we do? When students respond, you can reinforce their responses and questions to encourage future participation. You can make positive statements using positive non-verbal communication like smiling, nodding, maintaining eye contact. If a student gives an answer that is off target or incorrect, acknowledge the response and then think of ways to help the student provide a correct answer. For example, using probing, paraphrasing, asking the question in a different way. And be sure to vary the reinforcement techniques between verbal statements and nonverbal reactions. Try not to overuse reinforcement in the classroom by praising every comment the students make, because students will question the sincerity of this reinforcement if every response is reinforced equally in the same way. Also, probing. The initial response may be superficial. Make the students explore their initial comments. Ask probing questions. These probing questions will help them develop more critical analysis of their own ideas. And also adjust and refocus. Sometimes if a student gives a response that appears to be out of context, you can refocus to encourage the student to tie the response to the content that is being discussed. What happens when students respond with a question? Listen to the question, and after that you are certain that you understand the question that is being asked, be sure that the other students have heard and understood the question. And then you can proceed by answering the question yourself. This is useful when you have little time remaining in the class. However, the disadvantage is that you don't encourage student-to-student interaction and independent learning. And so if you have time, encourage the students to discuss that new question. You can redirect the question to the class, encouraging this interaction that I have mentioned, and also reducing the dependence of the students on you. Attempt to help the student answer their own question. For example, using prompts with reminders of previously learned information, for example. Or refer the student to a resource where they can find the answer. Now, what happens when there is silence? Okay, you can redirect. When a student responds to a question, you can ask another question to comment on the statement. And one purpose of this technique is to enable more student participation. You can rephrase. If the student provides an incorrect response or silence, try to reword the question to make it clearer. Provide additional information that will help the students come up with an answer. Break the question into manageable parts. And of course, importantly, use wait time. Allow a few seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds of wait time. Also, allow wait time after a response or a question. All this produces significant changes in classroom interaction. So, I hope this is useful, and I hope that it helps you rethink the way we use questions in the classroom. Finally, here are my contacts. If you need to ask me questions, here's my email address. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Here's my blog, and you can find more videos on my YouTube channel. So this is it for today. Bye, till the next one.